It's crucial to understand, though, that feminine thought and the current cultural Marxism, they go hand in hand together. The Western world, especially in the last 10 years, has seen unprecedented societal upheaval. There's been an undeniable push to make the world more feminine. We regularly hear things about the gender pay gap, which is a misleading myth if you've ever looked into it beyond the headlines. There's also the Me Too movement, which has both legitimate victims and sociopathic monsters looking to destroy men. There's also the ascension of undeniably feminine social media outlets like TikTok and Instagram. We've watched as the US comic industry has been feminized and gutted. Hollywood produces bomb after bomb with female leads that decades ago might have gone to men instead, and probably done a lot better at the box office too. We've seen the hiring of women at all cost, even when their only apparent qualification is mistress. Checking the scorecard right now, men are lonelier than ever, and women aren't really that happy either, despite their newfound power. Lest you think I hate women, no, of course I don't. I've had the same wife for 30 years. She's been a great mother and has her own career. We have a daughter too. To have a functioning society, we do need some intrinsically female traits. When you're in the hospital, you want a competent, caring person overseeing you. A close family member of mine's life was literally saved by a trio of female doctors, who not only gave expert care, they did so with compassion and love. If you've been in the hospital yourself, you know the value of a nurse who calms you down and eases your pain with a caring smile on her face. I'm sure a lot of folks have a female elementary school teacher that they viewed at the time and perhaps even afterward as a second mother. Now, this isn't to say that women can't or shouldn't have any other kind of career they want. Of course they can. It's just that they do seem to self-choose careers involving service to humanity. The statistics here are not even in doubt. But let's take a step back in time, maybe even just 10 years ago. Role-playing games like D&D were still widely seen as a male-dominated hobby. It still is for the most part, though there are more women players these days compared to when I first started in the early 80s. And this in and of itself isn't a bad thing. How do I know that? Well, experience for one. In the mid-90s, I was DMing a D&D group for a couple of years that was composed of 3 women and 2 men. I'm not even sure that we recognized it as a thing back then. And that's actually a tribute to the women in that group, that they didn't make a big deal out of it. And I think you'll find that this was probably true almost across the board, well, until recently. The reason for that is that the women who ended up sticking around in game groups in the past submitted to the rules of the game table, both written and unwritten. In other words, they were one of the guys. And what about those guys? Were they the evil misogynists out to get women? No. They were just dudes who got together to seek camaraderie, brotherhood, and an escape from real life for a few hours. Jokes about the typical gamer of the past being a 110-pound turbo nerd aside, the gaming table of the past was indeed a decidedly masculine environment. Just playing the game for the longest time came with the risk that societally, you'd be ostracized a little bit by the normies.
Well, let's get those nerds! Nerd! Nerd!
In the 80s, you also had to navigate the satanic panic, which often put you at odds with family members. But when you sat down at the table, all of that was forgotten. The DM's authority was generally accepted as unquestioned. Amongst the players, someone had to assert themselves as the leader, which I'm sure paid off in a lot of gamers' later lives. Assertiveness is crucial in how much you earn later in life by your willingness to do things like ask for a raise. Men in general are a little bit better at this, statistically, than women are. Most RPGs like D&D center around violence. Men are a little bit more fascinated with violence and death. Males are also drawn to fantasy and science fiction a little bit more. So it naturally follows that they'd make up the majority of gamers of the games based on those subjects. Most crucially, RPGs were just a key way for boys to develop friendships with each other. I mean, whether we knew it or not, we were using the game as a vehicle to grow as a person. Now, as I mentioned, women back then seemed to know what they were walking into. They were probably already a little bit different in that they were intrigued by the subject matter of games like D&D. The fact that gaming didn't significantly change until very recently tells us that girls, for the most part, tried to fit into this environment. Now, some tried and left, and that was fine. Some tried and stuck around, and that was great. Tables like mine back then were probably a bit less common. I'm sure the norm was for women to be outnumbered at the game table. So in a sense, they had to go along to get along. But there's a reason the D&D gaming in Stranger Things struck home with so many people. And it was verified to be fairly authentic by those of us who were those kids. It was 4 boys, emphasis on boys, over at someone's house, their parents' basement, having a great time, eating snacks, playing a game, and growing up together. So what changed? D&D, despite its current popularity, is creatively a shell of its former self. Now, I think that's due to the undue influence of leftist societal thought. I did a video recently on how D&D in particular was such an easy target for cultural Marxists. It's crucial to understand, though, that feminine thought and the current cultural Marxism, they go hand in hand together. After all, leftism cynically presents itself as mothering and caring to draw in the normal people. Leftism is a world where masculinity of just about any kind is branded as toxic. So it fits that they would now see the old game table as problematic. A study a few years ago said that a clear majority of women aged 18 to 54 would prefer to live in a country that is socialist rather than capitalist. And I would bet that that percentage amongst women gamers nowadays is a lot higher. So many women unfortunately believe the lie of socialism because it's quite frankly tailor-made for their sensibilities. The state as the all-powerful mother, taking care of its people from cradle to grave in the macro, doing what she is supposed to do at least partially in the micro. It never really works, by the way, because the money always runs out. That's the inherent lie of socialism. Women are innately drawn to safety and aversion to risk. There's very practical reasons for this, of course. They need their children to grow up safe to propagate the human race. It's up to fathers to push back a little bit on that, because we also need people who aren't afraid to take risks in the world. Those skyscrapers you see in big cities didn't build themselves. They were built on the backs, the sweat, the courage, and the blood of men. We also need entrepreneurs to risk everything they have to make the things we now deem indispensable. A little bit of risk, so long as it's not reckless, is a good thing. In general, I think you need a good balance between the masculine and the feminine. Or you need either of these to be ascendant in very narrow instances. I mentioned earlier about healthcare. You don't want your doctor or nurse coming in and saying, "What's wrong with you, you wussy? Just grit your teeth and bear it," as you're laying there with a broken leg. You want a sympathetic and competent ear. In the same way, the gaming table is just better when it's masculine thought that dominates it. Things run smoother and are generally just more orderly. Sure, you may complain about the DM occasionally, but you understand that even when he rules against your character, it's for the greater good. It's not an existential attack on you, it's just for the good of the game. And this was proven for decades as the game endured and prospered, so much that it became a lush target for bad actors. And now we see the ugly tendrils of rampant feminism corroding it. Once the DM had final say over everything, well, that's a bit too patriarchal, isn't it? Now it's actually any one of the players at the table that can stop play with a single index card if they feel unsafe. Just move on to the next scene, please. I don't like this one. Ludicrous things like the combat wheelchair and handicapped accessible dungeons creep into the game and are treated with reverence by the imbeciles in the mainstream RPG industry. Players are encouraged to fill out consent forms to make the table as safe as possible, despite there being absolutely no real-life reason to feel unsafe in almost every single case. Now they'll cynically say, "Why are you so concerned? It's just voluntary. If you don't like it, don't use it." They did say those things about safety tools, like the X card. But if you have been paying attention, it's becoming more and more expected at game conventions that these things are used. And I'm sure a lot of game stores have bought into it as well. If you don't challenge these things on the front end, they will become the norm. Nowhere is the rise of femininity more noticeable in D&D than in the artwork. The Stevens Universe CalArts style is slowly becoming the look of the game. And while it may have its place in other areas, the bright colors and soft edges just have no place in a game where you're acting out your character violently, sticking their sword into another person or creature, killing someone in what is generally regarded as one of the worst and most painful ways to die. Brought to you in full color with a smirk. There was a Lego study done that Ethan Van Sciver brings up regularly. They were looking at how boys and girls play with toys. When a boy plays with a Batman toy, he becomes Batman, and everything Batman is perceived to be. When a girl picks up a Batman toy, Batman becomes her. She imposes everything she is into it, and doesn't really care about what he represents or who he's supposed to be. Knowing that, it's not surprising that the iconic versions of D&D characters are no longer the brutal barbarian from the north, the knight in plate armor, or even a female warrior like Tarna from Heavy Metal. Now it's smarmy, wisecracking tiefling girls, folks like Jester from Critical Role, or very safe and inoffensive catboy characters. Even if we viewed this as simply misguided, too many people exhibiting sociopathic, feminist views towards men have revealed themselves. They also seem to have an undue influence in the industry, where they're not only applauded, but they're actually hired by many of the mainstream RPG companies. The real shame here is how easily men have let them do this. Now, I'm sure some men simply didn't care enough to stay and fight, so they just moved on. But all too many men have surrendered and themselves adopted this out-of-place feminine thought. This is now somewhat the norm.
Ladies and gentlemen, it must be 2020 again because the usual suspects are back on Twitter to complain about the combat wheelchair. That's right, the idea of a wheelchair in your Dungeons & Dragons game infuriates them so much that they are willing to bare their entire ass on social media to make sure you know they don't like that idea. One of the arguments they love to make is that this is a world of magic, so as a result, why would there be people who are permanently paralyzed? And they're trying to present a fantasy world in which healthcare is affordable and universal. And I'm all for that. 100%. You and me, brother, let's create that world. In fact, let's bring that to reality. Let's make sure that when it comes time to vote, we try to create a world that truly has affordable and universal healthcare.
You can almost feel the passive-aggressive female cattiness dripping off of him, can't you? But he's no longer a harbinger. He is a mirror. We used to have a game table where the authority of the DM was unimpeachable, and because of that, they created worlds of wonder for the players to explore without fear. Players weren't afraid to offend other members of the group with a little bit of ribbing, something I maintain is crucial for developing into a well-balanced adult, being able to give as well as take. Future leaders were born in the creative cauldron rolling a die 20. Lasting friendships and great memories were made. And now, we have a D&D table where DMs must at least pay passing attention, if not more depending on the group, to the content of their world. If they're playing with strangers online, there's the real fear of cancellation over something they might say that could offend a member of the group, and heaven forbid if it's being recorded. Safety over creativity. Players are encouraged to run to Mommy, aka the X card, if they feel threatened. Safety over the thrill of the unknown and confronting your inner fear. The violence of the game is, of course, still there, but just be careful who you commit it against. That orc you just killed is, according to some folks, a black person who should be shown empathy instead of the pointy end of a sword. That orc was some mother's son. In a nutshell, have fun, but watch yourself. You can almost hear your mom saying that, can't you? That's, of course, the message. Don't have too much fun. That would be unsafe, right? Plus, it would be unfair to the people who can't have as much fun as your privileged ass. So everyone has to share the burden of a little bit of misery. Brought to you by Mommy and her leftist pals. It's for your own good, after all. Hello there. I want to take a few moments to thank our sponsors who are providing you guys a very special discount just for being a fan of this channel. All the sites and discount codes, just for you, can be found in the description of this video. Our old friends from Neckbeardia offer a great variety of products, from awesome miniatures to supplementary RPG material, and even their own RPG rule sets. You just never know what new thing James is going to be cooking up over there, so make sure to bookmark their site and check back often. Crud Forge makes two great games that aren't afraid to poke a little fun at the people who, quite frankly, need a little fun poked at them. First is the quick and hilarious Virtue Signal, the game where you play a social justice warrior trying to attract followers to your cause before the other players can tear you down. Then there's the mammoth Portland Occupied Zone, or POZ. In this strategy game, you play as a complete disaster of a human being, trying to reshape Portland into a slacker Marxist utopia. Bring a few friends and warm up that throwing arm for some Molotov cocktails. Folks at Power Up Paradise are taking care of you with both a protective phone case and, when you flip it over, an ingenious Game Boy, which is built right into it. Go back to the golden age of video gaming and play dozens of challenging games that will delight and frustrate you in a good way. Mobile games are almost universally terrible, so why not take a step back when they did it right?
What qualifies you to be a U.S. Senator? You have 60 seconds.
Hi, good night, everybody.